3-Eye Atlas just changed color, and astronomers are terrified of what it means. 3-Eye Atlas shattered the physics of comets the moment its tail pointed straight at the sun. Instead of being pushed outward by solar wind like every comet in history, it fired in the opposite direction, expelling exhaust with precision. What began as a faint rock suddenly burned red and yellow, and then shifted again into a neon green pulse that lined up with small but deliberate course changes. For astronomers, this wasn't strange, it was impossible. An impossibility in space is terrifying.
The sudden color change. We've got some fresh images of 3-Eye Atlas, a third-ever interstellar object observed from Earth. The first tail had already startled astronomers, but what came next forced even the most cautious scientists to admit that something was happening beyond normal comet physics. This is the first time something like that is observed where there is a glow ahead of the object towards the sun. On September 7th, the James Webb Space Telescope trained its infrared instruments on 3-Eye Atlas, looking to capture a sharper, deeper picture of the strange visitor. What Webb returned was shocking. The red and yellow glow that had spread from the object in earlier days was gone. In its place stretched a neon green plume, burning with a steady intensity and then pulsing rhythmically as though it were alive. There's a mysterious interstellar object hurtling towards our solar system, exciting scientists across the globe. This was not the faint green haze astronomers sometimes expect when comets pass near the sun. It was not a soft tint buried in the gases of a normal coma. Instead, the entire tail seemed to transform into a luminous emerald spear, a light so sharp and concentrated that it looked almost artificial. And what truly unsettled scientists was not only the color, but the way it behaved. Each pulse of green light coincided with a tiny but measurable change in the object's trajectory. We'll pick out objects that are moving inside of the four frames, and we have to identify if they are real or if they are false detections, as though the glow itself were somehow linked to controlled bursts of thrust. One camp of astronomers argued for chemistry. Comets often glow green, they reminded the public, because molecules like cyanogen or diatomic carbon become excited under ultraviolet radiation. When those gases are stripped of electrons by solar energy, they fluoresce in green wavelengths. And to see that color is not unusual in itself. Indeed, comets like Lovejoy and 46P Wirtanen had put on spectacular green displays in the last decade, and the chemistry was well understood. From images, we also saw that this object is active, which is an indication that this object is in fact a comet. In this view, 3-Eye Atlas was simply venting more exotic gases than most, producing an exaggerated version of a natural phenomenon. But the other camp could not ignore the pulse. Natural chemistry does not switch on and off with clockwork precision. Gas release may spike, jets may vary, but no comet ever recorded has changed color and then timed those changes to subtle corrections in its flight path. To them, the glow looked less like chemistry and more like engineering. It looked like a system deliberately venting energy, perhaps even propellant, in a way that resembled a plasma drive or some other kind of advanced propulsion. 3-Eye Atlas, simply an extreme comet venting cyanide and carbon in ways we had not yet measured? Or was it something designed, a craft shifting modes, changing its color because it was changing its function? We cannot really pinpoint the nucleus size is partially due to the size of the object, but also it's partially due to the activity.
What the spectra revealed. If the sudden shift to green light unsettled astronomers, the deeper analysis of that light pushed unease into outright alarm. The James Webb Space Telescope is not only a camera, it is a laboratory orbiting in space, able to split faint streams of light into spectra, teasing apart the chemical fingerprints hidden in every glow. The job is trying to unearth. It's all there. The universe is like sort of hiding in the darkness, and we have to bring it out. When Webb turned this tool on 3-Eye Atlas, the results stunned researchers who had expected the familiar signs of ice and dust.
What they found instead was almost no trace of water vapor, the one ingredient that defines comets. For centuries, every comet seen by human eyes has been driven by the same simple process: water ice evaporating as it nears the sun, producing vapor, dust, and the familiar tail. It is so basic that textbooks describe comets as dirty snowballs, rocks mixed with frozen volatiles lit up when heat releases them. But in the spectrum of 3I Atlas, the signature of water was nearly absent. In its place appeared a cocktail of gases and particles that did not belong to any known cometary model. Carbon dioxide registered strongly, far more than expected. Cyanide showed up in clear spikes, along with smaller traces of carbon monoxide. And strangest of all, clouds of nickel dust appeared, scattering the incoming light in ways that did not resemble natural ice grains. To the scientists reviewing the graphs, the mix looked less like nature and more like design. Some began whispering the obvious comparison. The plume of gas around it is mostly carbon dioxide, 95% by mass based on the Webb telescope data. In experimental propulsion labs on Earth, engineers use plasma drives, systems that strip electrons from gases to create charged plasma, then hurl that plasma backward with magnetic or electric fields to generate thrust. Different gases produce different results. Carbon dioxide adds heavy mass for strong pushes. Cyanide conducts charge efficiently, allowing fields to grip it. Nickel particles stabilize the reaction and absorb punishing heat. The green glow of 3I Atlas matched almost perfectly the emissions seen when such gases are ionized under high voltage arcs in laboratories. This was where the unease turned into a fracture. Those searching for natural explanations argued that exotic ices could exist in interstellar bodies. Perhaps 3I Atlas simply carried unusual chemistry from a faraway system, releasing carbon and cyanide instead of water. But others saw the combination as too precise, too convenient, and above all, too effective. It was not just strange gases, it was the right gases, the very mixture an engineer would choose if they were designing a plasma engine for efficiency and control. What deepened the terror was the way the spectrum tied back to the pulsing tail. Every burst of green light aligned with changes in trajectory is that it's moving along a trajectory that is very special. Every surge of cyanide or carbon emissions coincided with a nudge in velocity. It looked less like venting and more like a timed system, the way rocket engines burn in intervals to steer a spacecraft. In that rhythm, scientists saw not randomness, but intention. And yet, there was one last fact they could not ignore. Many comets have glowed green before, their cyanogen and diatomic carbon molecules lit up by ultraviolet light. Comet Lovejoy, blazing across skies in 2015, had turned an unmistakable green. So had 46P1 a few years later. The color itself could be natural, but no comet had ever pulsed, no comet had ever shifted its path with each glow, and none had carried the chemical blend that mirrored an engineer's toolkit so perfectly. If these chemicals were natural, then we had discovered a type of comet unknown to science, one that rewrote the rules of cometary chemistry. If they were not natural, then the green plume of 3I Atlas was not just a tail, but an exhaust, the product of an engine running in the dark. Both conclusions carried weight, and neither gave comfort.
Signs of an engine, not a comet. By the time the pulses were measured in detail, even the most reserved astronomers began to admit that something about 3A no longer fit into natural categories. It's easier for me to think this is a new kind of object that requires way more study than we've given it thus far. Observatories tracking the object's brightness noticed that the green tail did not just flicker randomly, as one might expect from jets of gas bursting from the surface. Instead, it pulsed with mechanical precision, a heartbeat in the dark, repeating at intervals of exactly 232 seconds. Each time the globe peaked, the trajectory shifted ever so slightly, a nudge in speed or direction that could be plotted, predicted, and verified. Nature does not keep time with that kind of accuracy. Machines do. The implications were staggering. In spacecraft design, propulsion is never constant. Engines fire in bursts, conserving fuel and adjusting course through timed discharges of energy. The rhythm seen in 3A resembled exactly that kind of controlled system, and the fact that it was visible at interstellar scale shook those who analyzed the data.
That's going to be barely inside the orbit of Mars, and then it's going to keep going on its way out of the solar system. If this were simply ice venting, the timing would be irregular. If this were chemistry alone, the direction changes would scatter. But here, every flash and every motion aligned like clockwork. Speculation turned to the source of such power. At the heart of the pulses, scientists inferred must lie an energy system of extraordinary density. Calculations suggested an output near 10 gigawatts, an amount almost unimaginable for something only a few hundred meters across. To put this into perspective, the largest power plant on Earth, the Three Gorges Dam in China, generates about 22.5 gigawatts at peak. That facility spans miles of river, harnessing the force of an entire landscape. Yet here, in a compact body drifting through space, was an engine producing nearly half that power over and over again for weeks at a time. The contrast bordered on absurd. Human civilization builds colossal structures to reach such output. Whatever powered 3 ALICE fit inside a body smaller than many city blocks. Some researchers proposed that the nickel detected in its spectrum was not random debris, but part of this engine's architecture. Nickel is both dense and resilient, capable of withstanding high radiation and extreme heat. If the core of 3 ALICE were wrapped in a nickel shell, it could serve as both an engine block and a radiation shield containing reactions hotter than the surface of a star, while protecting whatever advanced systems might lie inside. The idea was speculative, but it matched the data better than any comet model could. Dissenting voices tried to soften the conclusions. Perhaps exotic chemistry could mimic this rhythm. Perhaps coincidences in outgassing had tricked observers into thinking the object was maneuvering. But those explanations began to collapse when orbital data showed consistent deceleration timed perfectly with the pulses. 3 ALICE was not just coasting through the solar system, it was actively adjusting its speed. For astronomers trained to trust natural laws, the sight was deeply unsettling. The sky is supposed to be predictable, a place where comets obey physics and orbits can be calculated centuries in advance. Now they were watching a body that glowed, pulsed, and shifted course as though it were under intelligent control. The term comet no longer fit. What they were seeing moved like a vessel. It moved like a machine.
Orbital oddities and strategic movement. For centuries, comets have been trusted as predictable messengers of gravity and ice. Their orbits follow strict curves set by the pull of the sun and the laws that Newton first laid down. Nothing about them has ever suggested intent. They sweep in from the dark, flare as they near the sun, and then are flung back into space on a path that can be charted with simple equations. That is the order astronomers expect. And it was exactly why the motion of 3I Atlas became such a shock. In the first weeks after discovery, orbital data showed the object was traveling at more than 88,000 kilometers per hour. By itself, that was unremarkable. Interstellar visitors like Oumuamua and Borisov had moved at similar speeds as they cut through the solar system on open hyperbolic trajectories. But what happened next could not be explained by those models. The trajectory is very well aligned with the planets, and it will come very close, as you pointed out, to Mars. Within just 2 weeks, the velocity of 3I Atlas had fallen by roughly 1,000 kilometers an hour. To an ordinary comet, that is impossible. Nothing in space slows objects down unless they collide or are deliberately braked. Yet 3IA Atlas was decelerating smoothly without any visible cause other than the green pulses flashing behind it. Even stranger was the shape of its orbit. Rather than rushing past Earth in a simple flyby, the path seemed to bend in ways that kept it carefully away from our planet's line of sight. When orbital simulations were run forward, they showed the trajectory threading a path that would carry it close to Mars, then past Jupiter, with an accuracy that looked less like chance and more like calculation. To astronomers used to random wanderers, this avoidance felt deliberate, almost as if the object were following a plan.
The evidence was not limited to a single observatory. In Chile, the Gemini South telescope confirmed that the tail was not only growing longer, but also sprouting structures, a bright coma, an anti-tail pointing inward, and luminous strands twisting like braided cables. Other facilities watching from different hemispheres reported the same anomalies, ruling out local error or instrument noise. The consistency of the reports reinforced the sense that Three Eyes Atlas was unlike any comet ever cataloged. To many, the idea of strategy could not be ignored. If Three Eye Atlas had been a natural fragment, its path would have mirrored the random scatter of Boris, which raced straight through without slowing, or the odd drift of Oumuamua, which only hinted at non-gravitational acceleration. But here was an object that not only slowed down, but seemed to weave through the solar system, as if choosing its course. It is only the third time we have detected an object that has come from beyond our solar system. Some called it the most disturbing orbital behavior ever recorded. Skeptics pushed back, pointing out that gravitational interactions with planets can sometimes produce strange bends in a trajectory, but those effects add speed rather than subtract it, and they cannot explain repeated deceleration paired with timed pulses of light. The odds of coincidence stacked higher and higher until even cautious scientists began to use words like mission-like when describing the object's path. The fear was not only what it was doing, but what it might do next. If Three Eye Atlas could alter its speed, then it was not bound to the passive arcs of gravity. It could, in theory, choose an orbit, slow itself further, and linger. The thought of an interstellar visitor no longer just passing by, but instead taking up a place between the orbits of Earth and Mars, unsettled astronomers more deeply than any glow or pulse of light.
The hydrogen line signal, light, was not the only message coming from Three Eye Atlas. While telescopes studied the strange green glow, radio dishes on Earth began listening, sweeping across frequencies to catch any signal that might ride along with the plume. At first, the scans returned the usual hiss of cosmic noise, the background radiation of the universe, and the scattered chatter of natural emissions from the sun. But then, in sync with the pulses of light, something new appeared, a tone, a hum, a signal at precisely 1420 MHz. 1420 MHz is known as the hydrogen line. It is the frequency emitted when neutral hydrogen atoms, the most abundant atoms in the universe, switch their electron spin state. It is universal, clean, and recognizable everywhere from the Milky Way to distant galaxies. For decades, the SETI program had chosen this frequency as the primary channel to search for extraterrestrial signals, calling it the watering hole of the cosmos. The logic was simple. If any intelligent civilization wanted to announce itself, it would use the hydrogen line, because everyone with a radio telescope would be listening. And now, with Three Eye Atlas, something was transmitting on that exact line. This object has just been discovered. Three Eye Atlas was discovered on July 1st by the NASA-funded Atlas survey. The discovery was more than coincidence. Each time the green plume brightened, the hydrogen line signal surged as though the two were linked parts of a single system. Brightness, thrust, and radio all pulsed together with the same rhythm of 232 seconds. Engineers familiar with transmitters noted that the pattern looked structured, not random static, but something produced by a cycling power source, perhaps even a form of communication. To others, it seemed like the byproduct of an enormous energy system, the natural spillover of a reactor or propulsion core powerful enough to bleed into the hydrogen spectrum. What made this terrifying was not only the existence of the signal, but its nature. Ordinary comets do not hum at 1420 MHz. No cloud of cyanide or carbon dioxide produces structured radio bursts that rise and fall in perfect time with visible light. To hear such a tone from an object already glowing unnaturally and steering itself through the solar system raised a possibility too stark to ignore. Either Three Eye Atlas was carrying a transmitter, or its propulsion system itself doubled as one. In both cases, it meant technology. The SETI community, which had spent decades scanning the skies with no confirmed detection, suddenly found itself staring at the very signal it had always predicted. Weak but steady, repeating but not chaotic.
The hydrogen line was no longer an abstract dream. It was being broadcast, however unintentionally, from an interstellar body within our solar system. Scientists debated the implications furiously. If it was deliberate, then 3I Atlas might be announcing itself, pinging every world within range of its exhaust. If it was accidental, then the signal was a leak, proof of a machine so powerful that even its waste energy echoed on the most universal frequency known to physics. Either explanation unsettled astronomers, because natural or artificial, chance or design, the hydrogen line is not where comets live.